Hello, welcome to In the Room with David Hume Kennerly. I am Byron Kennerly. I am David's son, and David is not only my dad, he is a Pulitzer Prize winning photographer. He was a photojournalist during the Vietnam War, and he was also President Ford's White House photographer. Now, growing up in my dad's house, there were always pictures on the walls, and being his son, I was lucky enough to hear the stories behind those pictures growing up. I was always fascinated by him. He's by far the most interesting person that I know in my life, and I'm lucky enough that he is also my dad. So what we wanted to do with this podcast was share those stories with you. Some are about historical events that you have heard of, like Nixon's resignation, and some are less known that you might not have heard of, like what we're going to be talking about today. But my dad has been on the front lines of history. He's seen it all, and he's photographed it all. And we wanted to share those stories with you. Dad, hello.
Hi.
There he is.
Being interrogated by my son.
That's right. That's right.
It's a little uncomfortable.
Every father's dream. Every father's dream.
Right.
So we're going to talk about many stories over the life of this podcast, but it was interesting about which story we picked first because it was important, and there's many to choose from, and we chose the story of the capture of the SS Mayaguez, which a lot of people probably haven't heard of, but I thought that this was a key story to share with people about why being in the room matters, not only as to allow you to take pictures, obviously, and document history, but also in this particular case, being in the room made quite a difference. So I want to start in March of 1975. It's March 25th. You've recently turned 28, and you are President Ford's official White House photographer. And there's a meeting in the Oval Office with Graham Martin, who's the U.S. ambassador to Vietnam, and Army Chief of Staff Wyand, and President Ford, and yourself. And you're there taking pictures. And so what is this meeting about?
The meeting was about dispatching Wyand back to Vietnam to assess if there was anything the U.S. could do to try to stop the invading North Vietnamese army. And it was a serious problem. Da Nang had fallen. That was the biggest northernmost city in South Vietnam. Wyand had been a hero of the Tet Offensive in 1968, essentially saved Saigon during this invasion. And militarily, it was a failure for the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, but it was a huge political victory. But Wyand had done the military thing right, and so he had the expertise. Ford wanted his assessment on what to do about this. After they walked out of the Oval Office, I told the president that I would like to go. I mean, I have a lot of friends who were there who had worked with me and for me, and I wanted a firsthand look. And the president said, "Look, I love your point of view on this because you don't have a dog in the hunt. I mean, you have the military, and on this trip were like had CIA people and Army logistical people. It was a last-ditch effort, really. But Ford wanted to hear my point of view."
Right, and the writing was on the wall at that point for Vietnam, but still we'd committed so many lives and resources that Ford was still committed to helping the South Vietnamese people, right?
Well, that's right. And in fact, he had asked for a defense authorization. I can't remember what the number was, $300 or $400 million to give to the South Vietnamese to show that we still supported them. But things were looking bad, and the Congress turned that down.
Right.
And it made the president really angry about it. And as a former member of the House, he was really disappointed in them.
Right. So you go to Vietnam, and that is a story that will have its own podcast soon. But for the purposes of this story and the story of the Mayaguez, I want to focus on the way back, because on the way back from Vietnam to the United States, this is now March 29th, March 30th, you went to Cambodia. Why did you go to Cambodia?
Yeah, I didn't. General Wyan was still meeting with everybody, but I wanted to take a side trip to Phnom Penh. One of my really close buddies was over there. Matthew Frangiola was the AP bureau chief. Here's a guy that speaks fluent Vietnamese and Khmer and Thai, and really a great person. But I wanted to see what was going on in Cambodia. I'd spent a lot of time there during the war. It was really a dangerous place to work as a photographer, as a journalist. And but to get over there was a bit of a challenge because the airport was under fire. There were no flights going in at all. So
the Khmer are running through the country, basically taking it over.
The Khmer Rouge, yeah. And so I went out to the Air America headquarters at Tan Son Nhut, which is the CIA airlines, essentially. And I had this piece of paper from the President of the United States authorizing me to do anything I wanted to do, but I didn't want to go and wave that around. And I walked into their headquarters and I introduced myself, and they knew who I was at that point. They'd gotten a bulletin about it. And I said, I want to go to Phnom Penh, but I don't want to ask anybody to risk their life to do it. So it would be kind of like a voluntary mission. And there's this guy sitting over in the corner and wearing like a white shirt and kind of a grizzled fellow. He said, what the hell, kid, I'll take you. So we climbed into it's called a STOL, S-T-O-L, short takeoff and landing aircraft. I mean, they can land in a tennis court practically. It's a fixed wing aircraft, but so they can land just on a dime. And he said, but here's the deal. The airport's under fire, so I'm gonna land there, and I will slowly taxi by the terminal, and you're gonna have to jump out.
Oh my God!
I'm not kidding. And so okay, whatever it takes, and I'd already sent a telex over to Frangiola, so he knew I was coming, and I was able to get him a note, and so this happens. I jump out of the airplane, and there's like no one in sight. There are a couple of guys behind a sandbag.
Now, when it's rolling, how fast is it going? Is this a Fast and the Furious situation?
No. It was like 5 miles. I could do it without injury.
But he wanted to be able to gun and run.
He totally took off right after that.
Yeah.
And just like I walked, I go bye. And then I realized that I hadn't booked a return trip.
Right.
And so here I am in Cambodia, and Frangiola was there to meet me. By the way, the airport's under fire. So we went around in Phnom Penh, and that's where I took this picture that won the World Press Photo Contest of the little Cambodian refugee girl with the dog tag.
Tears running down her face.
And I took a picture in hospitals of people dying. It was really grim. But the main thing that happened there was I got a top secret briefing from the embassy, and I went into their situation room, and there was Phnom Penh on the map, and there were all these arrows coming in, red arrows. And I said, let me guess, Khmer Rouge. He said, yeah, we're screwed.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah. And it was like, until I saw that, I had no idea that it was that serious.
Right.
So I told Frangiola that, I said, I think they're going to be ramping up an evacuation for Americans, news people, anybody want to get out, and I'll let you know. I mean, theoretically, I shouldn't have done that, but Frangiola was very close. He saved my life.
He was your friend.
He's my friend. He saved my life one time in Vietnam, and so I owed him one, and maybe two, and.
But he had to be aware of the situation about how.
Oh no! They all knew.
Yeah, right.
But it wasn't, and it was imminent.
Yeah.
And if you saw the movie The Killing Fields, this is the period, and all those characters who were in there. Anyway, I was able. There was another CIA plane came in. It was delivering some cargo. It was a small cargo plane that came in under fire, and I was able to get on that to go back to Vietnam and link up with Wyand.
So what was the conversation? Do you walk up to the plane and say, "Hi, I'm work at the White House"? Do you show your President Ford?
That's a good question.
How did that conversation go?
He was made aware of my presence there.
Got it. Right.
And the embassy guys, it was all, that flight was being coordinated by the embassy in Phnom Penh.
Right.
They said, we have a passenger for you to go out. And
that took you back where?
Back to Vietnam.
Got it.
Where I linked up with Wyand and Company, and then we'll flash forward back to...
Right. Do you still have that piece of paper from President Ford that said you have carte blanche?
I don't. I think it was a cable.
Got it.
I don't have it.
Well, if there was no expiration,
I had it.
If there's no expiration date, it could, in theory, still be useful.
Hey, maybe I'll get a pardon.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So you were on the ground in Phnom Penh, and then 2 weeks later, April 17th, the Khmer Rouge take over the city, and then they start to take over the rest of the country. You mentioned the movie The Killing Fields.
Right.
So there are journalists and embassy staff that did evacuate, like you said, but there were also some, and this is basically the second half of the movie, who stayed. So if you want to get an unbelievable look at what happened in the country in this period, I highly recommend watching The Killing Fields.
Right. In fact, there was... what's the name it played?
Sam Watterson.
Watterson played the
journalist.
Stanley. I can't remember his name.
It's strange. He has a strange last name.
But the main characters were all people that I knew over there.
Right.
But the photographer, Al Rockoff, John Malkovich became this guy. And I knew this guy, and it was incredible. I mean, Al had been wounded, and one time he had a piece of shrapnel in his heart, and it just happened. There was a French field hospital nearby, and as he put it, I bought the farm and the check bounced.
Wow.
But at any rate, all those people saved. Some of them went out. Frangiola decided to evacuate. They evacuated them over to Vietnam, which is like out of the kettle into the into the fire. But he and quite a few others, and that was it. There was one lift, and then by the time I got back to D.C., I was getting cables from people who decided to stay, but all of a sudden they were realizing that was a mistake. And I went into General Scowcroft and said, is there any possibility of another lift? He said, it would just be putting these guys at unreasonable risk. And so if you saw the movie, you saw what happened to them.
Yeah.
And they got out, most of them.
Yeah, because I think there was a lack of understanding about the viciousness of the Khmer Rouge and how untraditional an army this was. This was not the North Vietnamese army, which was, Viet Cong and guerrilla tactics. But once they took over South Vietnam, they acted in a more traditional sense of a conquering army, whereas the Khmer Rouge came in and started killing anybody with glasses.
They did, and the Killing Field story is really the story of Dith Prawn,
right?
And who was played by Hang Nor, whom I knew, and he won an Academy Award for that performance.
Yeah,
but that really tells the story of what happened, particularly for Cambodian citizens. It was a bloodbath. Right. They killed hundreds of thousands of people, and anyway.
And chaotic in a war zone.
That's right, and they were also evacuated. So the Khmer Rouge came in, and they just started kicking everybody out of Phnom Penh.
Right. So as you alluded to, and this happened faster than people thought, but April 30th, 1975, Saigon falls. So this is 2 weeks later. And this creates a dynamic where the Khmer Rouge tell the North Vietnamese army, who had been using bases and occupying, not occupying, but using Cambodia as a launching ground, they say, get out. And this creates a immediate tension between the North Vietnamese and the Cambodians, and they start fighting. And they start fighting over islands, and the Khmer Rouge aggressively start boarding international vessels. The islands around Cambodia have now turned into a war zone between the North Vietnamese and the Khmer Rouge. They are setting up these islands to fight the Vietnamese, and now we're going to get to the SS Mayaguez. So despite all this, no warning was given out to U.S. merchant ships. And on May 12th, the USS Mayaguez, a giant shipping, it's like a container ship that you would see, and this has 107 containers on it. It's going through there, and the Khmer Rouge swift boats go up and board the ship. In my mind, it seemed basically like the movie Captain Phillips, where Somalis took over this cargo ship.
Right,
It sounded exactly like that exact same situation. So by this time, you were back in Washington. You're at the White House, and word comes quickly to President Ford that this has happened. And so once
it's also worth noting that, unlike today, but you rarely find American sailors on these commercial ships. They're all different flags, and this one might have even had a Liberian flag on it.
Right.
But I believe the whole crew were American citizens.
Right. So it's like 30 to 40 guys, and they've now been taken hostage by the Khmer Rouge. About 5 a.m. on May 12th, U.S. intelligence intercepts radios, communications, and things like that, and finds out. And then President Ford at about 7:40 a.m. Is briefed on what happened. Now, were you there for that initial briefing when he found out?
Yes, and
who did it? Now, I read
that was Scowcroft.
It was Scowcroft.
Yeah,
okay, that's what I read.
But the president would get a daily CIA briefing at 7:15 every morning. I mean, he was one of those guys that actually cared about his intelligence community and what they had to say.
Right.
And in fact, the briefer's name was Dave Peterson. It was the same guy every day who came in and gave the president the presidential daily brief and some extra stuff. I would sometimes be in those meetings. I had top secret clearance. I could be in anything I wanted, really.
Right.
And I always found them pretty interesting.
I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm
particularly
sure.
then, because that was the whole end of Vietnam and everything else. You know, I observed that from the White House, and something we'll talk about later.
Yeah, and so this was immediately flagged as a big problem.
Yes, and it was Americans were now held hostage by the Khmer Rouge.
And the U.S. doesn't have diplomatic relations with the Khmer Rouge, with good reason.
I don't know that. Really, I don't think anyone except the Chinese had diplomatic relations with them, as I recall.
Right. So, what comes out of this? So now it's elevated to a point where President Ford chairs a meeting of the National Security Council, and so who was in this meeting, and what was discussed in these initial meetings about the incident?
Well, the NSC is comprised of the President of the United States, the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, usually his deputy, Secretary of State Kissinger, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the head of the CIA, the White House Chief of Staff, of course, who at that time was Donald Rumsfeld. And that's it. It was a small group.
Right.
And I was in all those meetings. Again, I had the highest clearance.
Right. So, and then basically from this point on, over the next day or two, there's confusion. The crew is moved off of the ship. It's unclear where they are. President Ford has ordered F-4s, which are these like jet fighters, to basically start sinking any Cambodian ship in the area. It's basically turns into an active war zone, and so what were the options presented to President Ford during this time, knowing that there was so much confusion going on?
Well, he had not a lot of options. One of the big problems was there wasn't any intelligence from in there. I mean, the Khmer Rouge had like wiped out any assets that they might have had. I mean, normally you would get some like intel from local agents and all that, but that didn't exist. So he was getting his information from the pilots flying over the scene.
Right.
They'd moved some other ships in there, but they were standing back, and they did ascertain that the crew had been taken off of the Mayaguez, and they didn't know where they were moved. And a lot of the money was on Koh Tang Island. They thought that made sense. It was 30 miles from Kampong Som, which was the biggest port around there.
Yeah, it's this. If you look at this island, it's pretty far off the coast. It's kind
Yeah,
of
and I
out
can't.
there.
I don't know where the Mayaguez was in relation to that, but it was
Right.
somewhere in between there, probably. And
Too close.
and so obviously they got into what was called contested waters.
Yeah.
Theoretically, they were in international waters, but that only
But if
works
the Khmer Rouge-
people like recognize
The Khmer Rouge don't recognize that. Yeah, it doesn't
That's right.
matter.
And so the problem was they didn't know where they were, and
Right.
and there were standing orders to sink any kind of Cambodian military boats.
So, but this Air Force security team is on this helicopter, and it crashes. This is not the operation hasn't even started yet. They're off to the staging ground, but there's 18 Air Force security personnel and the 5 crew of this helicopter
From Thailand,
and crashes.
and it was and it was not a hostile fire thing, but they did crash, and those guys got killed.
But it certainly set the tone for the things that would continue to go wrong during this operation. So as we move forward, the crew is on the ship. They have not been put on Koh Tang Island because everything is being shot at. So the Khmer Rouge have to move these guys around. They never land them on the island, and they think the crew is either on this island of Koh Tang or they're possibly on fishing boats. But do they think it's possible they're still on the Mayaguez?
I think they were pretty sure that the crew had been taken off, but they didn't know where, obviously.
Right. Do you know what was in the shipping containers on the Mayaguez?
I don't think I knew at the time. I mean, later, some of it was material heading to Saigon.
Yeah. So half of them were empty, and then the other half basically had all these military supplies going to Saigon. The Khmer never looked in the containers.
Yeah, that is so bizarre. I just found that out recently.
Right, because the real coup the Khmer could have had this like state of the art military equipment from the Americans, and they never looked. I find that fascinating.
Well, that was probably a good thing.
Right.
Well, obviously, if they'd looked, that would have made their case that these guys are spies, and because all their propaganda they were putting out was like, this is a spy ship, and
right.
I mean, in a sense, I mean, it had military gear on it, so that would have helped their case out.
The captain also had a U.S. government letter, to only be opened in extreme situations, which when this boarding was happening, he quickly burned and got rid of.
I wonder if he read it.
I don't know. We'll never know. So back to the White House. They think they're not on the ship, but they think they're probably on this island of Koh Tang, or they're on these fishing boats. And so what is the nature of, and where are these meetings happening? All your pictures are in the cabinet room, which is weird. Why weren't they happening in the Situation Room?
Well, I don't recall ever being in the Situation Room, because I don't think they used it. I would have been in there if there were meetings going on. And it was a small little room right down the hall from my White House photo office. I mean, like 40 steps from where I was. And I was in the West Wing, and I had to get from my office to the Oval Office is just going up the stairs and around the corner, and I was there in like 15 seconds.
Right.
But he preferred to have these meetings in the cabinet room, and it was high drama. I mean, there were charts and like aerial photographs. There were like satellite pics of the island, of that whole area. In a lot of my coverage, and because I had a classified or top secret clearance, and all my lab people, the White House lab was all military, and they all had top secret clearance. So everything I was photographing was classified documents. And there are a lot of pictures of the president getting a briefing, and they're showing him what the area looks like and where they think these guys might be, and a lot of supposition. Meantime, they're spinning up this huge military operation, and you mentioned the group of Air Force guys from Thailand who crashed, unfortunately, but they've moved an aircraft carrier in. They've got B-52 bombers on Guam at the ready. They have all that, called it tactical air, TAC air,
Right.
was coming in from Thailand and off of the aircraft carrier. I think it was the Coral Sea. So all this is going on in high drama. And this is Ford. I mean, Ford oversaw the end of the Vietnam War. And
But he's also only been president for 9 months, and he became president in completely unique circumstances.
That's right. And
So he's new at this.
He's new, except the thing about President Ford, a lot of people don't know, was he served heroically in World War II on an aircraft carrier in the South Pacific. He had gone through combat, had been in the almost lost his life, so he was used to and displayed courage under fire. I mean, he was a very even keeled guy. I mean, he was like the kind of person you want leading the charge at a time of crisis, and so he was very cool during this whole thing and very deliberate about it.
So the key National Security Council meeting, this is the fourth and the last one that would happen for this incident, happens on the afternoon of May 15th. So the diplomatic solution has failed, and the diplomatic solution was to basically have the Chinese pass a letter, because the Chinese, as you said, are the only ones talking to the Khmer Rouge, pass a letter to the Khmer Rouge to say, give us our people back. The Chinese come back and say, we're not going to give you the letter. The liaison is actually George H.W. Bush, who would later become president. He's the one handling the Chinese side of this. He says to the White House, they're not going to give him the letter. They
don't know where to send it.
They don't.
Essentially,
That
was
right.
a little problem there.
They said they might pass the information on verbally, but the report is that the diplomatic solution is not going to happen. So now they have to go.
And by the way, from my in the room perspective, like Kissinger's talking about all this stuff, and the Chinese are not able to get through to I'm listening to all this. I said, well, you're kind of limited now on your options, obviously. And my role, by the way, is just I take pictures. I don't like interject myself normally into these situations. I mean, I'm in all sorts of meetings, and I'm like, these are the pros, and but I had just been in Cambodia, and I'd been keeping a real close track on what was going on because I was interested in it, but so Kissinger basically said it from that letter from George Bush,
right.
That underscores what happened, which is there was no way that there was going to be a diplomatic solution.
And there also seems to be this tenor. Saigon had just fallen 2 weeks earlier. This is a pretty embarrassing time for the United States internationally and militarily. Did you feel that reflected in these meetings? Was there an attitude that they needed to save face?
Well, that's a really interesting question because there were people in the room who wanted to come down with a big stick.
Who?
It really
Who was on which side?
I'm not even going to say who they are.
Okay.
Yeah, but let's just say people other than President Ford.
Right.
Because if he'd wanted to do it, he could do it. But I think the conversation was that they, some people really felt it was important that the U.S. respond in this overwhelming way in order to say, hey, we may have gotten our ass kicked in Vietnam, but we're back, and we're going to show that as world leaders and a strong military and all that, this is what we're going to do.
Right. So to that end, there's no diplomatic options. They can't even talk to the Khmer Rouge. So President Ford is presented military options, and we're not at the hypothetical point anymore. He's going to pick what's about to happen.
That's correct. And he, as the commander-in-chief, was presented. I mean, it was like kind of early PowerPoint, but it was
right.
It was a big chart.
Okay.
Like all hand drawn. The CIA probably drew it up, and one of the strongest pictures I think I have out of this thing is Bill Colby, who's the head of the CIA, in front of this chart, and it shows you all the options and the times, and one of them was the TAC Air coming out of, I'm assuming that was a joint fighter jets coming from probably Thailand and off of the aircraft carrier. And then there was a B-52 hit that was programmed, and the B-52s were going to be flying out of Guam, and it shows when they would take off and then when they'd be over the target. But they were targeting around Phnom Penh, and this action...
They weren't targeting the island?
No, because then you would have blown everybody up.
Right.
But essentially it was a bulletin, a memo to the Khmer Rouge that this is what we could do, and we're doing it, and now you better listen up. Now, a B-52 strike, and I've been around a lot of them during the Vietnam War, are 3 mammoth airplanes, B-52s, and they fly in a pattern of 3, and they drop tons of bombs. And if you see the aftermath of that, I have pictures of it from Vietnam, it just takes out everything in this 3 big rows, and the craters are 100 feet across. I mean, wow. It's like huge. It's called rolling thunder because if you're anywhere near them, like a mile or two, you jump up and down. I mean, it shakes the ground like an earthquake. And so this is like a massive thing they're going to do.
Seems disproportionate to the situation that's happening. Because there's also a rescue op, right? They're going to pull up a destroyer next to the Mayaguez. Simultaneously, they're going to land 500 Marines on Koh Tang Island, where they think the crew is being held, and they're going to do this strike of Phnom Penh with B-52s, which seemingly just is a message.
And I can't remember what the precise targeting was, except bottom line, it was going to kill a lot of civilians.
Right.
And so, I must say, because I think about this, I said something in the middle of the...
You did?
Yes. David Kennerly...
You were not supposed to do this.
I took my muzzle off. And I said, has anybody considered that maybe it was a local commander down in Kampong Som who took it upon himself to capture the ship and because that's where all the action was down there. And also knowing, I mean, you just heard Kissinger say, well, they're not communicating with each other. I'm assuming they weren't communicating that well from like some spot in Phnom Penh where Pol Pot is sitting up there and telling them what to do. And I said, if you bomb around Phnom Penh with these B-52s to try to make an impression, that it may just be like a hollow exercise.
What was, I mean, I can't even imagine the response of the generals and the Secretary of Defense. How did they respond to this 28-year-old photographer saying something in this situation?
It wasn't pretty. Although nobody, but the thing is, I worked for the president. I didn't work for them. And, you know, they later, there were some indications of the press that I speak out in the corridors of power and policy meetings and all that.
Right.
Which is absolutely, except for this one. But anyway, the president listened to that, and he thought I was right. And I think he thought that was probably overkill, and essentially said, I don't want to make innocent Cambodians pay for us losing the Vietnam War. I don't need to make a statement like that. And I got to tell you something. That would have been a stain on his presidency of massacring innocent people. And it's not like I'm sitting in there as a pacifist. You know, I've never taken sides. I mean, I just like to tell the story. I don't have a political dog in the hunt, and I wasn't thinking about his legacy. I was just thinking, this is wrong because it's not going to do you any good. I mean, if it was clear and it was explained why this is going to make a difference and that'll probably do it, then, you know, go ahead. But it's not...
They were just doing it to do it.
It's up to the president of the United States. The president then calls up, he called it off. He said, we're not going to do it. And the other elements did play out, the TAC airstrikes and all of that.
Right.
By the way, the captain, Miller of the Mayaguez, and because those strikes were all around that area, they really got their attention, and they blew up a lot of stuff.
Right.
But it was the captain emphatically said that's what got him out of there.
Wow.
And I think, well, you can tell me.
But just going back, so when you spoke up in this National Security Council meeting when you weren't supposed to, and basically changed the course of militarily what they decided, did the president say anything to you?
Yes. A couple of things. Number one, I never talked about this. And until President Ford wrote his book, his autobiography.
I have the text. Do you want me to read it?
Well, you should read that because you should know, I never said a word about that. And of course, everybody in the room knew what I did.
Right.
Right.
So here's what President Ford said in his book. There was a lull. I won't do the accent. I can't command President
Midwestern.
Ford.
Yeah, tough to do.
There was a lull in the discussion. Then, from the back of the room, a new voice spoke up. It was Kennerly, who had been taking pictures of us for the past hour or so. Never before during a meeting of this kind had he entered the conversation. I knew he wouldn't have done so now, unless what he had to say was important. Quote, has anyone considered, he asked, that this might be the act of a local Cambodian commander who had just taken into his own hands to halt any ship that might come by? Has anyone stopped to think that he might not have gotten his orders from Phnom Penh? If that's what's happened, you can blow the whole place away and it's not going to make a difference. Everyone here has been talking about Cambodia as if it were some traditional government, like France. We have trouble with France, we just pick up the telephone and call. We know who to talk to. But I was in Cambodia just 2 weeks ago, and it's not that kind of government at all. We don't know who the leadership is. Has anyone considered that? For several seconds, there was silence in the cabinet room. Everyone seemed stunned that this brash photographer who was not yet 30 years old would have the guts to offer an unsolicited opinion to the president, the vice president, and secretary of state and defense, and the director of the CIA, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Yet, I wasn't surprised, and I was glad to hear his point of view. That's what he said.
And then he called a strike off. And then
Right.
what he didn't put in here was after the meeting, as we were walking back over to the Oval Office, he said, "Hey, look, I really appreciate. I think you made a good point. I agreed. And but next time, can you just slip me a note?" I said, "I don't think there'll be a next time." I said, I wasn't, and if I hadn't done it right then and there, that the trigger was going to be pulled because they had the military, the way they do things is it's all ordered up. You know,
Right.
I mean, they have to change plans once the battle starts, obviously.
Sure.
But this one was going to happen.
And it did. The other parts did happen. The tactical airstrikes on any boats in the area. The destroyer pulled up to the side of the Mayaguez. They dropped tear gas on the deck, and Marines in gas masks took the ship. There were only a few Cambodians on there. The crew wasn't on there, obviously. And the other half, probably the more consequential part, was that these 8 helicopters with Marines landed on Koh Tang, and that immediately went wrong. They were expecting 20 to 30 Khmer Rouge unprepared, and as I'd mentioned before, the Khmer Rouge were preparing for war with the Vietnamese, and this island was fully armed, and it was basically built up like Omaha Beach. And this is what the Marines...
And they had no idea.
They had no idea.
They walked into a hornet's nest.
No one knew.
Right.
And so they walked into the hornet's nest. 5 of the choppers are destroyed, basically. Marines are being shot up left and right. And as this is happening early in the morning in Cambodia. President Ford, there's pictures of this, is on the phone in a tuxedo because he was at what was that event that he was at?
There was a dinner for the Prime Minister of the Netherlands.
Right.
So he was getting reports while he's there because now this operation is underway.
Right.
And there was something else that happened, though, now that I think about it, but a couple of things. One, that he was getting reports through Scowcroft's office, the NSC, and they were bringing them right in, like direct contact with the pilots out there who were relaying back what they were seeing, like voice communications.
Right.
And at that, that was like 1975. We're talking like 45 years ago.
It's pretty
It wasn't
advanced,
like
yeah.
now, where you could like shove a cruise missile into
Right. But it sounds advanced for the time. It's for the communication.
Yeah, it was pretty, and so, but one of the reports was a pilot who said he thought he saw some Caucasians on the ship, and he was supposed to blow it up, or it was a Orion, which is sort of like a command and control plane.
Saw it, right.
But they were telling the jets what to do, and they're
Right.
so they're kind of like spotting the targets, and the pilot saw that, and that word got back immediately to the president. He said, "Don't do it. I mean, you can't take a chance."
course.
And guess what? They were all on that boat.
Right.
I mean, that you talk about operations going wrong. That would have been a dilly.
Yeah. And so the Khmer Rouge, it turns out, had decided that morning, as this operation is beginning, to release the crew. And so they're on this boat. They're being brought back to the U.S., but the U.S. didn't know this. So these Marines are on this beach where the crew is not. They're getting shot up. But now word gets back that the crew has been released, that they're back on board. And there's sort of this celebratory mood back at the White House. Seemingly, there didn't seem to be, at least looking at the pictures that you took, I think it's probably after this dinner, it's around midnight, they're sort of celebrating that the crew is released. Meanwhile, there's this operation that is going horribly wrong. So
Right.
Was there an awareness that this was going so badly for the Marines?
No, I don't think so. And I think the after action reports showed that this happened. I mean, it's a war zone, honestly. And this was the moment where I think Ford really became the president of the United States in his own mind, as more secure in his role. And I have one photograph of him with his glasses on his head, and he's like, you could just see that this guy's in charge. And before, the night he became president, the night that Nixon announced he was resigning and he would become president the next day, I should say, he came out onto the lawn of his house over in Alexandria and talked about this is happening, but you should know Henry Kissinger is going to be kept on, and obviously that was a signal. But I thought it was a peculiar thing to say. And Ford is a man with not only military experience, but he'd been in Congress and that, military affairs and all that stuff. I mean, he definitely knew his way around, and had been vice president for about a year, or a little less than a year at that point. But he was insecure about it and about being president. And the Mayaguez incident was where I thought, as an observer of this guy from the time I met him in '73, that I thought that was the moment he took over. He wasn't worried. In fact, he was contradicting Henry Kissinger and what he wanted to do.
He was standing up. It was the first time he was saying no to that.
Yeah, and Henry, who is just a guy who knows how to deal with power, certainly,
of course,
and has
right.
wielded it for years. But you could see Ford's dependence on others kind of melt away, and that he really became the chief. And I think that was a key for me. I truly believed that he was sailing alone. He certainly listened to people, unlike other presidents of recently.
Right.
Just didn't want to take advice. They went with their gut or blah, blah, blah. It was like, in this case, he was methodical about it. He was intelligent about it. And he was, you could see the leader emerge in the Mayaguez incident.
Right.
So President Ford's in a tuxedo. They just finished the dinner with the Dutch.
It's around midnight or 1 a.m.
I guess. I can't remember. But it was, they're in the Oval Office, and Schlesinger, by this time, has gone back over to the Pentagon and gets word that the crew was out of there. And so there were two calls. One was that they said half the crew, and then there was a second call. And a lot of what I've read about that, and just my recollection, but I went back and looked at the material, sort of the photographic evidence of being in the Oval Office, and it looked like Rumsfeld got the call, walked over to the desk, and said that the crew is out, or some of the crew's out. I can't remember precisely, but it was a positive thing.
Right.
And everybody who was there, just sort of like, wow. And President Ford is like showing joy. And that was a good picture. I mean, you don't get pictures like that very often. It was good news.
Yeah.
Later, I released that picture to the press. It got a lot of play, but because these other people, Marines, had been killed, and Rumsfeld thought I shouldn't have put the picture out. And I said, but the bottom line is it's the story, and that's what happened. But, I understand why he did that, but...
but that kind of became the narrative of the incident. In the public, President Ford was basically lauded for this handling of it because the crew was rescued. The side where the Marines were killed in this operation went pretty wrong on an island where the crew wasn't even there.
Right.
That kind of gets brushed over. Do you think, or did it feel like that at the time?
I think there had been a lot of criticism about that,
Right.
rightfully, I do. But bottom line, I mean, military people are going to die in operations, and it's unfortunate, but their job, I mean, the best knowledge they had said they were there. They never would have put them over there,
Of course.
unless they didn't strongly suspect, but they did not obviously have the good intelligence on that. But I think in this case also, and I know President Ford felt really bad about that, of course.
Right.
I mean, that's a tough job. If you're the President of the United States, you got to send military forces into battle, and
You don't always have all the information.
No, even though Osama bin Laden raid, they weren't at 100%. They were debating, well, maybe it's 60%, maybe it's 70%, maybe
Right.
it's, there were certain people. I mean, they didn't know exactly, but what are you going to do? I mean, Obama made the right call there, as it turns out. And,
Right.
But those are the kind of things that this operation ended in American military people getting killed. And however, it also ended, and it was directly responsible for the crew of the Mayaguez being released.
Right.
And the captain of the Mayaguez said, look, if they hadn't done that bombing locally, we'd still be there.
Right.
Or they could have killed them, as spies. They were doing that kind of thing.
So, one thing you've imparted to me over the years as a key to your success has been your discretion and your trustworthiness, so that when you are in high leverage situations where you need to keep a secret, the people you're taking pictures of have full trust in you that you're keeping a secret, that you won't speak out of turn, and that you will basically do your job. This incident is different than that, because it sounds to me like this is the one time in your career where you spoke up in one of these high leverage situations where you weren't supposed to, where you actually being in the room made a difference in history, literally, because of this B-52 strike. What about this moment made you speak up? And what about this moment? Why do you think Ford listened to you?
Well, for one thing, speaking up in a top secret meeting, as far as I was concerned, that was never going out of there. I never said a word about it until the president wrote about it in his own book. That's the first time anybody knew about it. They didn't ever get it from me.
Right.
Later, I can tell you the story now because he said it. If he hadn't said that, I wouldn't be sitting there telling you this story right now, because I take that responsibility very seriously. President Ford once said, my tombstone should read, "Here lies the worst source in Washington." I did not talk about stuff, and there are things I know I'll never talk about. And but
you were able to get in the room because of that very thing.
Yeah, and the president trusted me, and essentially all those people in the room were, everybody has a top secret clearance, everybody's an important person, but they're the decision makers, not me. And what made me say that was I thought it was a bad idea for the reasons that have been laid out by Henry Kissinger, and that one side didn't know what the other, within their own, the Khmer Rouge,
Right.
that the communications weren't that great. And it just seemed wrong to me. And it wasn't like I was doing it as a pacifist or I just thought it was a really bad idea. And I thought that a lot of people were going to get killed and they weren't going to accomplish their mission. And they really had not thought it through properly, in my estimation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that comes out in the Marine operation as well, even on a smaller scale. But there are elements of this military operation that were.
But wasn't a small scale for the Marines
Well,
who
no,
got killed.
of course not. I mean, in terms of a B-52 bombing, but
yeah, that was huge. I mean, and because I've seen all that stuff, I've been there on the ground when there's been a B-52 strike, and I've seen these things. There wasn't one person in that room that I'm aware of that had ever actually seen any of that happen. And it just happens to me. For me, I'm one of the few people who's been in the room where a decision was made to start a war or end it, and to be in the war also. And so there was a lot of personal experience that went into me saying that. And it was, as he said, I mean, I thought twice about doing it because I just didn't do it. It wasn't like I was running around all the time trying to tell you what to do.
Do you think I'm seeing kind of a theme here, which is President Ford relying on you, basically an outsider, not in the military, not in civilian military leadership, first by sending you to Vietnam to have outside eyes on the ground, and second, taking your recommendation over the people that I just mentioned. Do you think that reflected a distrust of his advisors? Do you think that he was suspicious that he wasn't getting information that he should have been?
I don't. No, as a former military guy himself who'd been in combat, and he had a lot of faith in those people, but he also had a lot of faith in me. And he knew what I'd done in Vietnam. I think one of the reasons that we bonded was because I had been there. I had been in combat. And I mean, that doesn't make you necessarily a smart person, because in my case, I didn't really have to be there. But on the other hand, it is an experience. And he trusted my judgment about stuff. I've been involved with a lot of private conversations with them and about many things, that I wasn't some wild ass running around there,
right,
trying to be the Secretary of Defense or anything. I mean, I clearly understood my role there.
Yeah, so there's sort
but
of
by the way, there was no law against me speaking up in that meeting.
Right.
When you said there was no rule, it just wasn't done.
Well, right, because if you do that too much, you don't have that job anymore.
I didn't do it. I did it one time, and private conversations are another matter.
Sure. Right. And so, yeah, in fact, in one of my research, just something that popped up was that Kennerly himself was often the last person to see President Ford each day, often over drinks, which made other White House officials nervous.
It did. They should have been nervous.
Yeah, so we can. I think that's a story for another podcast. One last thing. There's the most recent sort of but the most recent history of this incident. It was written by somebody named Christopher Lamb, who worked for the Rand Corporation, who have their own, let's say, investment in Vietnam and how it went. He basically he belittled your contribution. He basically said that hadn't made the difference. I'm just going to quote this here. Ford could not have considered Kennerly's intervention eye-opening unless he forgot everything he had previously said, referring to comments Ford had made about the situation. Ford was either inserting some drama into his memoirs or just giving Kennerly, whom he considered, quote, like a son, a flattering mention. Gerald Ford doesn't seem like the type that would, with a flair for the dramatic, as far as telling a story. Like you said, he seems like a pretty even-keeled guy. Is there any credence to that? Do you think that your comment actually didn't make a difference?
I never talked to that guy, so I'm one of the few people left around that was in the room when it happened.
Right.
And he wasn't. I don't know who this guy is.
Right.
But I mean, it happened that way. I mean, there was no. Why would all these people have been so pissed off at me? In retrospect, the Army guys and the Air Force guys and those people, that didn't make them look very good. And the idea that they did that over their well-prepared operation.
Right.
But no, he's wrong. I mean, he wasn't there. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
And he never called you or anything, right?
No, of course not. No, why let truth get in the way of a good story?
Right. So, how do you think this would have played out today? I mean, I think the best example that I can think of in my lifetime, which is obviously more recent, would be the Mogadishu Black Hawk Down incident. But again, that was in the early 90s. In this
that was during the Clinton
day and age, how do you think that a tanker being held hostage? I guess the Captain Phillips thing would be a good comparison as well. But but this is different. This is sort of a hostile army in a war environment. How do you think it'd play out today in the 24-hour news cycle?
Well, I think you'd be seeing it play out live on cell phones.
Right. The crew, right? The crew would have cell phone videos.
it would be, oh my God, they're coming aboard.
Yeah.
And it's so different now. I mean, everything that was so isolated. I mean, you had the isolation of the Khmer Rouge just shutting everything down, the country, of forcing people out into the countryside, murdering their folks. I mean, by the way, one of the really most compelling museums is the Killing Fields Museum, where we went to. And
skulls.
That is
skulls.
hard to take. That is hard to take. I mean, the magnitude of horror of what the Khmer Rouge did. I'll tell you one thing: that crew's very lucky to be alive.
One last note: the last 41 names on the Vietnam War Memorial are the airmen and Marines who were killed in this incident. So this was basically the last official action of the Vietnam War.
And their names should be there. And the Vietnam Veterans Memorial is sacred territory to me. I have a lot of friends that are on that wall who I went to high school with, who were military people in my class, my graduating class of Westland High School in Oregon. And I don't think anything's stronger than seeing all those names. I mean, there were 58,000 or whatever. I don't know what the final number was. But the people not on the wall are veterans who are still suffering. Guys my age, mainly guys, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the lingering nightmares of Vietnam. And you don't see those names on the wall. The one-legged veterans and all these people who suffered in other ways, they're not on the wall. That's killed in action or died related to Vietnam. And through all this, there are people like me who document the heroism of those people. And that's part of my job.
Well, Dad, thank you for sharing that story with us. One of many. We have a lifetime to get through for the podcast, and each are, I think, just as interesting as that one. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. This is our first podcast. If you liked it, the best way for people to hear it and for people to hear these stories, which I think is important, is to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to this. If people review it and it goes up, it shoots up the algorithms. I don't know the science of it, but please rate and review. Also, go to the episode webpage right now. You can click it, and you will see all the amazing pictures that my dad took while this story was happening. So if you want to see the pictures that we're talking about, and I highly recommend you do because they give a wonderful context to the story, just click episode webpage on the podcast right there, and it will take you to Kennerly.com, where all the pictures will be there, so you can follow along. I think obviously this is an audio medium, but I think looking at the pictures is an important part of this story. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time in the room.